congressman, United States congressman.
Hold on. When you guys are speaking, when somebody's at the microphone, I can't hear them. It's rude to them, and it makes it difficult for me to actually answer the question.
Okay, as a United States congressman, and I interpret that as your #1 job is for the United States.
Correct.
Rather than in Idaho.
I agree with you 100%.
Can you share with this group how the tax cuts for people with a couple with over $250,000 a year, taxable income, not total income, taxable income, helps people with low and middle income with their health care?
Good question. So if you remember, I opposed the first version of this bill. And the main reason I opposed it is because it did mostly tax cuts and not enough about health care. And to me, that was wrong. It was more of a tax cut bill than a health care bill. So I spent the last 6 weeks making sure that this was a health care bill. We got rid of the Obamacare taxes that were in Obamacare, but we also made health care more affordable through this bill. So we were helping everybody, all of you. My job is to help the vast majority of Americans, to help the largest group of people that I can help. And that's what I think we did with this bill that we passed yesterday.
I disagree with you, but I hope you come back and can prove me wrong. I doubt it. An MIT professor who studies reported yesterday that this is probably the single most, for one bill, as the greatest transfer of wealth from poor to the wealthy of any bill. Obama and the Democrats promised that you were going to pay less for your health insurance, you were going to have more affordable care, families were going to save more money, and all those things proved to be incorrect. This bill, no, for the majority of Americans, it was correct. You helped, like I said earlier, you helped 7% of the people at the expense of 93% of the people. And that's just not what we should be doing. Data reflects, and we want to,
yeah, we need to go to the next
question. We need to go to the next person. Thank you very much. Oh,
Thanks for the opportunity to visit this morning, Congressman. I don't want to talk about health care.
That's okay if you do.
I think it's an individual responsibility more than anything else.
So do I.
What I wanted to ask you about was bureaucratic federal overreach amongst the regulating agencies. I represent the part of the fire contracting community, and we provide fire suppression services for federal and state agencies at no guarantee of work, of course. The regulations from the Department of Labor and a number of other places seem to be reaching into these industries, and instead of guiding and building the industries up and helping employees, they seem to be targeting them for extortion and administrative overreach and penalties and things like that. One specific law that I would feel like needs to come under review under these circumstances is the Migrant and Seasonal Worker Protection Act, and it was passed in '83, designed to protect migrant agricultural workers who were working on farms and things like that. And through a series of administrative occurrences and some court rulings, firefighters were thrown into this under this umbrella.
Migrant firefighters or firefighters?
Firefighters, period. Okay. And there are some really good things in the municipal law. Some good protections that workers need and deserve, protective equipment, pay statements, fairness, which I agree with. However, the firefighting industry is regulated through the Forest Service under the Fair Labor Standards Act, through the Service Contract Act, through the DOT regulations and all these things. And so to take this industry and lump it in with agricultural workers, which is not what we are, it puts us in a wrong classification. The Department of Labor doesn't even list firefighting under an agricultural job code as, for which termination.
Can I stop you right there just for a second? It's the first time I hear about this, so I'm not trying to be rude at all. Can I get you in touch with one of my staff? In fact, Brad's going to come. I really would love to talk to you about this in more detail, because it's the first time that I hear about it, and we want to see what we can. What's your suggestion for fixing it?
My suggestion would be a review of the law and proposing an amendment to exempt us from that regulation, because it's over-regulation. And the biggest reason is the Department of Labor is using it as a stick to beat small businesses with and extort money from them, which they did to me. And there's no due diligence. The Forest Service doesn't support it. Our other government agencies don't support it. And so you've got an intergovernmental conflict. You've got a conflict between industry and government. And there's no transparency. There's entrapment. There's all these things that are going on that subvert this process.
So I'm going to have you talk to Brad, but in general, since I don't know the specific issue, I'm going to talk about the general issue.
That's what I'd like to.
One of our problems in government, I kind of mentioned it earlier with Dodd-Frank, is a lot of big companies actually like these regulations, because the person who gets squeezed is the little guy.
That's right.
Your bigger competitors can afford to have a few additional regulations because they already have a whole regulatory compliance department, and to them it doesn't cost them that much of additional money. For you, it costs you, enough that maybe you can't hire an additional worker, or maybe you can't make a little bit more profit, or whatever, but it's hurting you at a bigger rate than it's hurting somebody else. And we're seeing that again and again with regulatory compliance in Washington. I had a friend who told me about 3 years ago that this is a totally different example, but he owned a trash company in New York. And the regulations were getting so heavy that he ended up selling his business at a loss to his biggest competitor. So his biggest competitor just got a new account out of it because it didn't cost his biggest competitor anything to just add his small business. So he spent 20 years building this business, and the more regulation, it just drove him out of business. And he ended up losing all his money and making his bigger competitor more profitable. And I think that's something that government does all the time, and we need to stop that. So when you talk to Brad, we will take a look at that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so the next number, 447. If you have number 447. Number 776. 776. And then number 466. 466.
Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. It's really good to see you here, unlike our Senators Crapo and Risch. Seem to have forgotten about North Idaho. I'm not going to give you 100% brownie points, though, because you spend plenty of time in southern Idaho. My question is, how are you serving the state of Idaho, your constituents, when you won't...
I didn't hear the first part of your question. That's my bad.
How are you serving your constituents here in Idaho when you vote with the Freedom Caucus based on a vote that you do within that caucus, instead of just voting for how you should for your Idaho constituents and not for some radical conservative bloc? You represent us, you represent all of us, and if you're going to try and run for governor, then you better be representing all of us. This is ridiculous.
You actually, most of you who are more liberal than me should actually like the Freedom Caucus. So let me explain to you what the Freedom Caucus is. I was in Congress for 6 years, and I realized that as one member of 435, I had very little influence. But what I started realizing is that there were about 30 or 40 people who were like-minded, kind of like your indivisible group. When you're one, you're less powerful than you're as a group. That's the only thing that Freedom Caucus. I don't think, are you part of Indivisible? I'm not, are you? I'm just asking a question. You don't have to be rude. I'm just asking you a question. I'm trying to have a dialogue. Obviously, you just came here here to yell at me, not to have a dialogue. And that's pretty rude. So if you're a member of Indivisible, which is a liberal group in Idaho, it doesn't mean that you're surrendering who you are to the Indivisible group. It's you think that there's strength in numbers. Just like if you belong to the ACLU, just like if you belong to the NRA, just if you belong to any of those groups. You're not surrendering who you are. You're finding like-minded individuals who agree with you. That's all the Freedom Caucus is. We have 40 people who agree on policy and agree in the direction that we want Congress to be. And the reason I think most of you should like the Freedom Caucus is because the reason we formed the Freedom Caucus is that what we had was a top-down management in Washington. It was the Speaker of the House would come to a member of Congress and would say, you have to do this. And if you don't do this, we're not going to give you money for your re-election. And you have to do this. And if you don't do this, we're not going to put you on the right committees. You have to do this. And if you don't do this, you're not going to get all these other things. Well, guess what? That's less representative of Idaho because it's representative of my leadership team. I didn't go to Washington to represent my leadership team or even the Republican Party. I went to Washington to represent the people of Idaho. So I found people that are like-minded, just like me, who have the same thoughts and concerns about the growth of government, who have the same thoughts and concerns about how Washington works. And we decided to get together. When we vote in there, we're voting according to our principles, based on what we believe in our districts. If 80% of us agree on those same principles, then we push it as a group. So what I'm doing is I'm representing my interests, my Idaho interests, and the interests that I told my constituents I was going to represent, but I'm doing it with a larger group. The problem that you have is that you disagree with me. Well, 67% of the people of Idaho disagree with you. They elected me to go to Washington, D.C. because they disagree with me. You come here to yell at me because you don't have a majority in Idaho. You don't. You represent the minority. I try to represent every Idahoan. That's why we do constituent services, and that's why I disagree with my party all of the time. I'm one of the members of Congress who disagrees with the Republican majority more often than most members of Congress, because I am not there to be a Republican or a Democrat. I'm there to be a representative of the people of Idaho.
You're on as an independent for governor, right?
Okay, next question.
Logic doesn't really work with it.
I don't know.
But
I'm Gerald White, and a few years ago I was co-chairman of Region 2 School Board for the...
of what, I'm sorry?
Co-chairman
Okay.
of School Board for Region 2, and we were presenting things, ideas. At that time, Microsoft lent us their strategic planner, okay? And the things that you're doing here in Lewiston with the high school are exactly what we were trying to do about 20 years ago. So I have to applaud that. The next thing, I am a practicing, or was a practicing professional dentist. And also I'm very associated with a dental company called Ultradent that started in 1979. It was a lot of hard work. And so I know something about the regulations and financing, that type of thing, in export markets. I'll give you a little run on Ultradent.
if you could get a little closer to the microphone.